Good. Okay, I'm getting a bit confused here about the recording in progress. All right, good day, everyone. I suggest we get started. Welcome all of you at the ETUI. I see a few new faces. That's good. This is the third time that we are organizing the ETUI lunchtime sessions. Some of you were here a couple of months ago, 2024. We had a first session with Stefan Leclerc. We were discussing about the Asia Pacific and how industrial relations there, which seems very far away, do have interesting lessons and I'd say learning points also for European industrial relations. I have to say I was surprised that they did have some relevance, and they did. We had a second session with Professor Anil Verma on the last month, I believe. He's from Canada. And we were discussing, yes, you were there, you confirmed. We were discussing how workers across the world, across the globe, can have a voice and be empowered in the workplace. And he was giving the very concrete example, I believe, of garbage pickers. Again, very far away from our day-to-day reality here, and very, very interesting and very important. Today we have Dimitris Stevis. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Yes, thank you very much. Marwan and I exercised a little bit together, let's say. So Dimitris, we're very happy to have you here today. Welcome at the Institute. Welcome to all of you. And we'll be discussing today an important topic: labor, environmentalism, and just transition. As is the case with the other topics that we discussed during the lunchtime sessions, this is a topic that is somehow close to what we do and not at the very heart of our own research. And so the idea is really also to expand our horizon to beyond Europe and to beyond the topics that we dive into our daily practice at the European Trade Union Institute. You do know, of course, that we have quite a bit of expertise when we work about the intersection between labor, climate change, social justice. We have a number of publications on that, but also, and Anna can confirm, because she's working in the education department, we have a lot of training materials, a lot of trainings going on in the education department on the same topic, and it's really one of these issues where between research and education, I think we are able to cross fertilize between research training, but also our own policy commitment and policy engagement. It's one of those topics where we really try to influence also the EU debate, getting a little bit more difficult now than it was until, let's say, 1 year ago. But the idea that, let's say, the interchange between environmental sustainability and social fairness in a new context of revamped focus on competitiveness is, of course, a topic that is very close to our heart and that of the European Trade Union movement. So we believe that if we want to understand those dimensions, we need to have both a historical look and look at it from a global perspective. And that's why I believe Dimitris are here with us today. I will pass it on to Jane in one moment. She'll be chairing. I just want to thank you and especially Marwan for organizing this session. Very good. That also that we create this together. Maybe before we actually get started and before I give the floor to Dimitris, let's do a quick round table here so that we know and that you know especially who your audience here is. I think it's quite diverse, at least I hope it is. So let's do a quick round table. By the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Bart and I'm a director of the research department here in the Institute. I don't know how we're going to, we can just do pop up and present him or herself who wants to, or we do it the old school way and we go start with Jane and we continue that way.
Starting on the left.
Yes, starting on the left. And if you could all speak up, that would be good.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bart. My name is Jane Parker. I conduct research here at the ETUI in the Foresight unit, and I'm also a co-editor-in-chief of the Transfer Journal, which is the house journal of the ETUI.
I'm from Ukraine. I have PhD from National Aerospace University, where I founded and led alternative trade union like ages ago. But it was a real interesting experience. Contrary to the official unions under Communist Party.
Thank you very much. Good to have you, Marwan.
I'm Marwan. I am a researcher here at ETUI on the field of climate change, green transition, and workers' health and safety. Good.
Hello, my name is Jamie Kendrick. I'm a political advisor at the European Greens, and one of the areas I work on is green social policy and welfare.
I'm Walter Svensson. I'm a researcher also here at ETUI, working on labor market trends and inequalities more from a social economic perspective.
And this is Maria. She's following.
I'm Maria Nikolova. I'm communication officer at ETUI. I'm in charge of this kind.
And has helped me many times. Thank you.
It's true, we had before. So.
Maria is one of our Swiss knives here at ETUI. Thank you, Maria.
I'm Anna Kosecka, as Bart mentioned. I'm an education officer in the education department, so I organize and coordinate trainer programs here.
Hello, I'm Costin Kazakov from European Commission, FISMA, Financial Instruments and Banks, and I was curious to the topics interested me, so I hope you have sent me here, and I'm curious to learn more. I'm from Romania, and I also saw a country report on Romania.
Glad that even DG FISMA is now discovering the ETUI, so you're very welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please.
So my name is Elise Pax. I work for ETUI, that's the International Corporation of FGTB, so Socialist Union here. And currently we are doing together with two other NGOs campaign on just transition. So that's why I thought it was interesting to join.
Hello everyone, I'm Frederique Mbala. I'm from the Green European Foundation, where we also occasionally work with Dimitris Stevis, who is the former director here. And yeah, generally work on like the climate, social, and energy nexus, but also broadly in just transition. And it's my first time here in the building, and I'm really excited to be.
Okay, I am Lilian Young here. It's also my first coming here. Beautiful place. For the rest, I am a citizen concerned about the future of the world, especially in the trade and the situation of the workers.
Excellent. Welcome.
Roland Goebel. I'm president of BeLife, which is a humanitarian service for medical and biological assistance, deployable anywhere, which was developed with the support of the European Space Agency.
Thank you. Welcome.
Michel Dudonné, historian.
Hello, I'm Dimitris, government.
I'm Malfa Sedik. I work as a consultant for renewable energies.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So
We have also online people, but some of them they didn't want to talk, but maybe one would like to.
okay, bring them on.
Mauro,
Who is online?
you then.
No? Okay, fine. So, Dimitris, as you can see, a very diverse group: researchers, European Parliament, government, I heard, consultancy, trade unions. You also, I think, trade union related, a historian, a citizen, etc., etc. So it's a nice and diverse group. I will pass it on now first to Jane to introduce it.
Thank you very much. I'll be chairing today, although I don't think you'll need much chairing, to be honest. But this session, as Bart said, it's the third of these lunchtime seminars run by ETUI, and it's something we'd like to make part of the DNA, I think, of the organisation. Now, turning to Dimitris, really thrilled to have you here, and that's also in large part due to Marwan. So thank you, Marwan, for all your efforts in this area. And I also like to thank my colleagues Bart and Maria for their sterling, as usual, assistance with putting this together. But with Dimitris, I understand that you've worked with some of the colleagues here for quite some time, and obviously you know Marwan well from his time at Colorado State. And I'm also really pleased to say that Dimitris and his colleague Brendan Davidson will be contributing a chapter to a forthcoming ETUI/ELGAR book, which looks at trade unions and their role when it comes to climate change. It's not out for a while, but it's something to keep on the horizon. We're really looking forward in particular to your chapter, which will look at the role of ideas and historical preferences of unions towards climate change. So I'm already thinking it's going to be one of those upfront chapters which will set the tone for what follows and will give us a very good sense of play in this field. So amongst other works, Dimitris is also the editor along with Emerita Professor Laura Ratzel and Professor David Buzzell, who will be familiar to a number of you, on a well-known and no doubt well-thumbed handbook from Paul Grave about environmental labour studies. And I understand that also last year you were co-editor of a special issue of Environmental Politics, which looks at planetary justice. So that might be one to have a look at if you haven't already done so. Dimitris is also the founder of the Center for Environmental Justice at Colorado State University, and his work focuses on the real political economy of labor and the environment. And in particular, he pays attention to power and power relations, equality, justice, social divisions, and just transitions, as we'll hear about today. And I note also from your PowerPoints, because I had a sneak peek, that one of your research sites in your work is actually the European Trade Union Confederation, which is just across the hallway here. So Dimitris has about 25 to 30 minutes to chat, and a bit longer if you'd like, or not. And then we'll have a Q&A. And I'd ask you, please, if you can just say your name and affiliation again for the purpose of the session. If you have a burning question along the way to clarify a specific point, for example, then please do flag that as well. But otherwise, we'll take the questions once Dimitris has concluded. So no further ado, actually, I should just mention that Marouane will also be moderating, so he'll help to collate questions and get those included online. And so with no further ado, we'd like to hand over to you. Thank you, Dimitris.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. After many, many years, I used to come to ETUI about 20 years ago when I was trying to compare North American labor relations that were emerging as a result of North American Free Trade Agreement and changes that were taking place in the European Union. Today, what I'd like to present is a work in progress, and I'm looking forward to your comments and ideas. And if you have specific things that you want to ask, let's go into some more depth. But I need some help with the work in progress. So I'm going to start. Okay. Make it a bit smooth. Can we get rid of the? Oh, you can see, right? No, it's okay. I'd like to discuss the goals of the presentation and the project, in fact, that I have in mind, the research questions that will drive this project, then talk about international unions, the trajectory and their present situation. You see why. Same thing with global labor environmentalism, and then an analytical scheme that we have developed with my collaborators, and we're going to be using in ascertaining and studying the interface between international unionism and global labor environmentalism. And it's something also that involves environmentalist and social movements, but we're still at the somewhat beginning stages. So the end results of this, as Jane mentioned, will be a chapter with Brendan Davidson from the Green Solidarity book that she's crediting, an article for the European Economic and Labour Relations Review with Linda Clark from Westminster and the founder of the production of the Built Environment Institute, has done a lot of work that area, and Coralie Gibb. And then also a little bit later, a Cambridge University Press Element book, again with Linda and Coralie, which examines the interface between international unions and global labor environmentalism and the impacts that has had on, if any, on international unions. This whole thing is motivated by three long-standing interests of mine, and I think my collaborators. The first is the nature of and role of global and regional labor organizations. This is something that's been close to my heart for the last 35 years. I think one of my first publications on the subject was on this. My dissertation, by the way, was on deep seabed mining, if anybody's interested, which has become very, very, and then I retooled, I changed. So that was one of my first publications. The rise of global environmentalism is something that I've been interested again for the last 30 years. And I fused the two to the best of my abilities, and the role of IUs in promoting, to the degree that they did, global labor environmentalism, and then importantly of whether global labor environmentalism has had an impact on international unions as organizations. That has been of interest to me. In reading through the history of international unions, I have found that one of the big questions is the question of confederalism versus federalism, authority vis-a-vis members. So, how do we interpret global labor environmentalism? That's the first question. I'm going to finish with that, but we have created an analytical scheme that deals with breadth, depth, and agency. And I think that's particularly important to interface, to digitate breadth and depth, because it is very possible, certainly in our times of competitiveness and geopolitical competition that is becoming more and more pronounced, to make sure that we do not equate policies, whether it's green transitions or just transitions or anything else that we find very good, but which is limited and is purchased at the expense of global divisions of labor, because that creates resentment, which eventually comes back to haunt us. And certainly that can also lead to divisions amongst environmentalists, amongst labor unions, amongst social movements. Then we're going to look, you can think of that as the dependent variable, if you like. But the independent variable is the role of unions, so international unions, and the impact that they've had on global labor environmentalism, and we're going to look at their membership, organizational arrangements within and across organizations, and their ideology. And there's some work that has been done already on that subject by a collaborator of mine, Roman Feli, and we hope to build on that. And we want to look at what has been the impact of particular national and regional unions, including European trade union federations in the ETUI, of course. And the last question is we want to see whether, in fact, the focus on global labor environmentalism and the role that some of global unions have played has had an impact on them as organizations. Has it made them, help them coordinate more? Has it made them more federal as opposed to confederal? You're probably more familiar than I am, and I'm looking for advice. But when I did some research a long time ago on global framework agreements, and I recall talking to people in the previous building and elsewhere in Brussels and Geneva, and so we like to be like unions. We like to be more like unions. And where have we gotten in that? Has global labor environmentalism, which really, I think, to its credit, the global labor movement placed just transition on the agenda, took it from the United States, where it was first verbalized. I don't think the United States is really the originator, but people say that, and I've said that too. It was left for dead by 2001, 2002 in the United States. Nobody would use the term just transition, and somehow managed to bring it where it is. That, I think, is an accomplishment with all its goods and bads. Let's talk about international unions as an overview, as I understand them, and here is where I can use some of your help and assistance. It refers to global and regional union organizations which have moved from direction of confederal consolidation within and across, but not federal. We can discuss the difference. But this has been a debate within the global union movement from the very beginning, more or less federalism, more or less confederalism. There are some serious tendencies within the international unions, both across global union federations, across European trade union federations, and of course across national unions, which I think we need to pay attention to as a result of what you mentioned earlier, competitiveness and the rise of nativist neoliberalism and geopolitical competition, which is, I think, very concerning Certainly in the United States, it has become very pronounced when the United Auto Workers came out in support of tariffs, and President Trump, about a year after it had carried out one of the most innovative strikes in recent US history. So when I talk about global unions, with certainly the national centers, ITUC, Trade Union Advisory Committee, and the World Federation of Trade Unions, which had been left for dead but still around, and has actually adopted a document on just transition. Sectoral unions are the global union federations you're familiar with, and TUIs, those are the global union federations of the World Federation of Trade Unions, and then networks, the Trade Union for Energy Democracy, which brings together unions from the global north and the global south. What's very important is they have created a southern counterpart, and they have given more voice to the south. And then regional unions, the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas, and some of the European Trade Union federations. And what is important here is that the ETUC and some of the ETUFs are autonomous. They're not part of the Global Union Federation of the ITUC. Sometimes people don't realize that, and they don't realize, you know it better than I do, that that's not something that happened by accident. So it's something to think about. So let me just very briefly go through international unions before 1992, and I don't spend too much time on that. But in my research, I think that they have been historically confederal, intersocietal, with particular national unions playing a leading role, first the Germans, then the Americans. Now you tell me who's influencing them. In the 1970s, there was a very interesting, innovative effort led by the United Auto Workers to enhance the role of global union organizations through the World Company Councils. Didn't get as far, but there was, as a result of that, a 5-volume study by one of the premier business schools at the University of Pennsylvania, because they were very, very alarmed about the rise of labor internationalism. It's kind of historic note. And then, of course, global campaigns. From 1992 to 2007, we see a little bit of a consolidation. There was a move towards federalism, but it didn't get far. I think we are confederal. I think global union organizations and European union organizations are confederal. We can discuss that more. Even though the international trade secretariats were renamed to global union federations, because they want to be federations, they are really confederations. And I think global framework agreements was a way to mutate corporate social responsibility in a different direction. So I think at this, as of the 2007, despite the unification of the World Confederation of Labor and the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions and the decline of the World Federation of Trade Unions, we can say that the result was another confederation, International Trade Union Confederation, as opposed to federation. That may sound like a minor thing, but going back 100 years ago, there was a big debate as to whether unions should be federations or confederations. So this is not an accidental. And then what I mentioned about the ITUC not being a regional arm of the ITUC, and any insight you have on that, we very appreciate it. Just move a little bit faster. To the present, I think the things haven't changed dramatically. I think there are some collaborations amongst global union organizations, but also some serious gaps. SIGTUR, the Southern Initiative on Globalization and Trade Union Rights, which was an effort to create a counter weight, has basically disappeared. Chinese and Russian unions remain outside or partially inside. And so we are at this point in time, one can say that global unions and regional unions are rather confederal. Now, global labor environmentalism, and I want to just clarify what we mean by it. We don't mean environmentalism that appears throughout the world in different countries. The question we have, is there an explicit approach or explicit approaches to global labor environmentalism adopted by international unions? Is there one or more? The closest we've had to that is just transition. But we also know that there is not one definition or operationalization of just transition. But the fact is that just transition is probably one of the most unique shared trainings that global unions have had and regional unions for in a long, long time. What does it mean? Does it mean that they have converged towards one operationalization of just transition, or are we splintering in different directions? That's an interesting question that we hope we'll be able to explore. And we want to see whether, in fact, this emergence of global labor environmentalism has had an impact on global and regional unions as organizations. Very quick account of global labor environmentalism. Before 1992, there were some interesting developments associated with occupational health and safety, and interesting enough with housing. And then increasingly the global labor movements are getting influenced, sort of listening to sustainable development, but there wasn't much before 1992, but unions were recognized as an actor at the 1992 conference in Rio. During the 1990s and all the way up to about 2004, 2003, most of the work of global unions, but also national unions and regional unions, took place in the UN Commission on Sustainable Development. And in fact, I remember going to one of those meetings and I used the term environment and I was shut down. I was told not to use the term environment. We're not dealing with the environment here, we're dealing with sustainable development. I learned my lesson. So evidently people thought that there's a big difference. But something very interesting happened during that period of time, and a network of labor environmentalists emerged. And here I think we should give credit not only to Belgian and Dutch unions, but in particular to the Comisiones Obreras in Spain, who created sustained labor and labor environmentalist organization that played a profound role in globalizing labor environmentalism. And it's global labor environmentalism that, at least in the meetings that were taking place up to 2006, when the Nairobi meeting of labor unions took place. I forget what it stands for. Anybody? I should have written it down. But there was a big meeting of labor unions in Nairobi with UNEP, ILO, and TUC. A lot of publications came out of it. Just transition was included, but it was broader than just transition. But I think that was a very important turning point, and one would say one of the highlights in terms of creating a global labor environmentalism. Then the Americans came back to the COP meetings the year after that, had some interesting interviews with the people that led that. The crisis hit, and all of a sudden, from 2008 on, just transition, decarbonization were put on the agenda of the ITUC. The ITUC put it on its agenda. The ETUC also came out with some very important statements that were moving in the direction of just transition, but not yet. And I think after 2007, we have just transition in the context of the COP, the climate COPs becoming the main priority. And just check how much my, good, I'm good, good time. Yeah. There was a collaboration that took place from 2007 to 2015. You can see all those acronyms. Southern unions are getting involved, particularly South African unions. Just transition finally found its way symbolically, the UN Paris Agreement, and climate justice matured. And additional international unions such as the ITF, ETUC, and the IMF address environmental increasingly just transition. So the point I think we can make here is that just transition, whether we like it or not, and there are different just transitions, would not have existed were it not for global union organizations and their allies in certain national unions, South African, TUC in England, Comisiones Obreras, Dutch and Belgian. So that's quite an accomplishment. I mean, there might be other examples, I'm not sure. So the international unions and global labor organization, that's basically what I just said. But one of the things that happen, and it's something we're thinking about, is that as we're moving towards just transition in association with climate, a narrowing of just transition took place. Just transition was not intended just for climate. Its original conceptualization was about any transition, logging, chemicals, healthcare, you name it. It was very broad approach. And I also have a very peculiar approach to just transition we can discuss a little bit later. But the point I'm trying to make is that as ground was found, as the crisis of 2008, 2012 hit, as the idea that there will be decarbonization became more prominent, just transition was associated with climate change. That was a narrowing of the concept and something we need to think about. On the other hand, those global union organizations genuinely engage nature, genuinely engage ecosocial. So in that sense, the approach of global labor organizations towards the environment became deeper. A little bit narrower, but certainly deeper, in my view. So since 2015, there's more global, regional, and national unions have developed policies on just transition, but there is significant variability in both approach and commitment. However, the green industrial economic policy approach, which is, I think, more powerful than the just transition approach within the union world, is dominant. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. I think the eco-social framing that ETUI, I think, has done some work on is a very promising one. I find that to be promising. But many national unions are not committed to just transition or a transition. We shouldn't lose sight of that just because just transition has become very popular, that somehow every union or the majority of unions in the world is promoting a transition or a just transition. And I think we need to pay attention to the growing geopolitical competition and nativism, because are a major challenge to labor environmentalism and internationalism. So since 2015, just transition has proliferated. Sometimes just transition in non-energy sectors is justified in terms of climate, as opposed to autonomously saying, well, we need to have a just transition because of AI, or we need to have a just transition because something else has taken place that causes a transition in education or healthcare. Myself, I'm involved in a project on just transition and care, and that's something we've been discussing the last few years. We can focus on healthcare, education, domestic work, earth care, and food provision. We've learned a bunch of things. I think that focusing on just transition only on segments of working people can create divisions. And I see just transition, personally, we can discuss it as an expansion of the social welfare state rather than sectoral. And of course, the eco-social welfare state owes a great deal to Europe. So in my view, the actual just transition, the roots of the actual quote-unquote just transition are to be found in the growth of the social welfare and eventually the eco-social welfare state that goes back about 150 years. Everybody would agree on that, but we can talk about it. So very quickly, we have an analytical scheme. We're going to look at the breadth, the spatial breadth and the temporal breadth of particular policies. We're going to go look at the data, the documents, the approach of the various organizations. We're going to ask about its temporal and spatial scale. Those are not accidental. We're going to look also at the scope. So it's very possible to have something global, but only with respect to particular workers, right? As it is possible to have a great just transition or a transition in Europe, but as Brandon Wiesen and other people have said, sort of enhance the imperial mode of living. So we have that. Does it include all workers and communities affected by the transition or some? In Colorado, the state of Colorado has an actual just transition policy from coal. It's probably one of the most advanced just transition policies in the world in terms of implementation. It's small, but it's advanced, very creative. But it does not preclude mining and exporting coal. Isn't that strange? It precludes the use of coal to produce energy in Colorado. So you can see how something that's great for Colorado ends up, thank God we don't have as much coal, but Wyoming next to us has a lot of coal and they want to export it. So that's what we want to capture with the breadth. Then we have the idea of depth, to the degree to which particular policy, whether it's a transition policy or just transition policy, integrates the social and the ecological. In my view, and that's why I like the eco-social approach that ETUI has done some work on. We know that every environmental policy is social. Sometimes we have a harder time thinking of every social policy as ecological, but I think that is the case. So we need to think of it not as one affecting the other, but as being part of the same whole. I'm going to focus on agency. Do the IUs initiate something, are they acting or reacting? Does it seek to ameliorate somebody else's initiative? Is it sort of supplicant? Do they address the breadth and depth of the practice at hand, or only parts of it? And very importantly, do they coordinate with each other? Because we have noticed that there is a lot of splintering. People don't talk to each other. And then we're going to look at what might call that in our independent variable, the membership of IUs, and there is a lot that needs to be discussed here, including the fact that international union organizations are interstate organizations. You might say, oh, that's normal. It's not normal. There were unions in the past that had their own members across the world, right? Directly, transnational unions. They disappeared because the idea was that you don't intervene in the domestic affairs of another union. And that might be a good idea. I'm not saying no, but membership is not, in a globalized world, something you need to think about. Organization of IUs, some people have written about international unions as meta-organizations. I would like the global union movement, just correct me if I'm wrong, to be like sports federations. When I look at the soccer federation, sorry, I'm about that. They are powerful, and yet they are nationally based. How do they do it? Why is the global labor movement able to do the same thing? So that's kind of an interesting question for me. And let me just go to the last one. Ideology, of course, is very, very important. We know there are ideological differences across international unions and within international unions. They were more pronounced in the back, certainly during the Cold War, certainly before World War II. And those are the ones we're going to be looking at. If anything is missing, please let us know. ITUC, Trade Unions Advisory Committee, GAFS, TUED, ETUC, and the more autonomous ETUFs, because some of the ETUFs are part of the GAFS. Anything missing? We're not going to do the World Federation of Trade Unions. If anybody, oh, sorry, I thought I had that under control. Sorry about that. So, any questions, suggestions? And I want to thank you very much for your time.
Any questions, suggestions?
Some key question, as I'm going to say. Do you consider effect of aggressive neo-imperialism or the environmental labor movement or just transition?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why we're using the analytical scheme of breadth and depth, because we want to capture the fact that something, particularly the breadth part, that it can be limited to a particular place, a particular country, even a particular sector, and aggressively sort of displace harm onto other sectors, onto other countries, onto other sectors of the working class. So our analytical scheme is precisely to capture and to avoid being trapped in sort of particularism. Yeah, we do. And I think that's a major concern. And one of the projects I'm involved in, which is a separate project, is on critical minerals in the United States across the lithium cycle. And as you all know, the competition on critical minerals, and you're from Ukraine, and so you know that very well, is profound. And it's affecting unions, it's affecting, of course, communities, affecting countries. So that I don't know if we're going to be successful, but the whole idea of breadth and depth is precisely to not lose sight of the fact that a particular union, a particular environmental group, a particular organization, a country may come up with something that we say, it's great. This is like as green as it comes. And then we realize that it aggravates competition.
That epoch of imperialistic wars is not over, unfortunately.
It's not over, no. It's not over. I just show, I don't know if any of you have seen, there's a recent global poll asking people how many of them thought that there would be a major global war in the next 10 years. And the numbers have gone up enormously. And let me, for a second, I had a collaborator, his name was Terry Boswell. Terry Boswell was a brilliant man. And what he did is a world systems analyst, and they look at contractive cycles and where hegemonic wars take place. And he told me 20 years ago, before he died, Dimitris, is going to be a global war in 2035. And I laughed. I mean, I said, no, come on. I'm not laughing now. I don't.
Maybe visionary.
Well, he didn't wait down.
Yes, but I don't know.
There are
There's certainly other questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you say a bit more about the work on critical raw materials? Because it seems to like touch on the different aspects. You know, if there's a battery plant in one country, it might be could potentially provide great green jobs, but then, you know, on Serbia or Chile, it could be not from a job perspective, but from, you know, access to water, access to farmland, have big just transition implications. So I'd be interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, our project focuses just on lithium. It focuses on 4 sites in the United States. So it doesn't focus internationally. However, even within the United States, you can see that. You can see that particular places are absorbing the costs for electrification of cars, for the creation of batteries at the expense of others. So particular places in that, and if there is something useful in our research is that we have decided very consciously to try to cover as much of the value chain as possible. So there are 4 different sites: extraction, battery storage, battery manufacturing, and training, big training center. Because we want to see whether, in fact, what may look good at one place may actually be not as good down the chain and the other way around. You're absolutely right. I mean, for instance, one of the sites that we are studying just had a big fire, a huge fire in California. And we cannot find out why the fire took place, why the battery storage is there. We suspect that they had decided there was previous manufacturing facilities there. Place is dirty. Why don't we just do it there? So I don't know if that answers your question, but you know, we are very, very conscious of that, and hopefully we'll be able to eventually move beyond the United States. But even in the United States, even in a particular country, particularly a large one, you can see that there are differences, tensions, and conflicts across the life cycle, with some places getting the more desirable elements, in other cases getting the less desirable elements of the cycle. But I know, of course, we have the triangle down in South America, and of course, cobalt elsewhere. So it's even more complicated than that. And Serbia, you just mentioned that.
Yes, please. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Friederike Möller from the Green European Foundation. And this is more a question related to the European context, so it also depends on how much you feel like you can speak on that. I remember reading a bit more about the concept of resilience a couple of years back, and how it essentially functioned as a sponge concept that allowed a lot of broad coalitions to emerge, because everyone sort of had a different idea of what it actually meant, but it was still an agreement, so that was good. And I have the feeling that with just transition, because you also mentioned that it's not a clearly defined concept and people do have different ideas about what it is. So I wonder if that instinct that I have is correct. And then secondly, what you would propose moving forward given that the transition is up in arms, or like that there's still, it's at least a very dynamic situation in the EU. Would you recommend to be more specific about the meaning or less specific, and how would you propose that the concept can help to build broader coalitions moving forward? Sorry.
You would like to
know, once you're finished, I'd like to build on that. So.
Okay, I'm finished. Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to liaise my question to the colleague from GEF. So not at all working on or not working on these topics at all. I was in all honesty just impressed or amazed that there is something like global labor environmentalism. Because I've assisted in some, I mean, quite a few trade union meetings, including the executive committee of the European Trade Union Confederation, the ETUC. And the disparity and of course the divide on this topic is very clearly present and leads to some tensions at some points. Between North, East, South, West, especially the interventions from some of the Eastern European countries on this topic are quite, well, very different from, say, the discourse that, for example, the Belgian union, because you mentioned them, have. So saying that not all unions are fully committed to just transition is a very nice, how would you say that? There's a word in English for that.
Understatement.
Understatement. Yes, a very beautiful understatement. Or euphemism. And so linking to what the colleague just asked, I'm wondering, is this, one explanation would be that the terms or the words used by this global labor environmentalism are so not only non-constraining, of course, but also so vague, or maybe creatively ambiguous that's why there can be such a thing. Or are there other explanations? You know, I'm really curious about it. So how does this global labor environmentalism come about? And also linked to that, if it is creatively ambiguous or if it's very vague or unspecified, did it have any impact? Because maybe even being very vague, it could still have been very influential or not. I'm curious about that.
I will just add something. It might be so long, but my question, which is linked to that, is also regarding the role between those global labor environmentalism and concrete local examples. And I'm mentioning that because in Argentina, they have this FLA, Frente Auténtico de Trabajo, authentic front.
In Argentina or in Mexico?
In Argentina. In Argentina. No, Mexico. Yes.
Okay.
True. And actually, it's nice because they have participated in the bargaining of the free trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the US, and they have. They did a really good job, but they do it. They are a union. They are constructed as a union, but they define themselves as a movement.
Yeah.
And they talk about environmental citizenship and labor citizenship, and they're trying to change the perspective of labor environmental aspects.
Well, let me just respond. You know, because I agree.
And we can take the question online afterwards, so we can and then let me get the floor to Mauro. Yes.
I agree, and I think that something you can have local things, or you can have efforts by particular organizations, which can have what some social scientists call raise the boat, or lead to upward harmonization or downward harmonization. So just local policies are not all the same. Individual moves are not the same. We have to figure out what are they doing and what are they contributing to. So the Frente Auténtico de Trabajo, I think, has been has chosen something, has been collaborating with its counterpart in the United States, the electric workers, but they're a small group. Now that brings us to the question you said. I think there's a network of unions, a minority, in my view, who have been promoting an approach to global labor environmentalism. So one of our questions is, what is that global labor environmentalism? How far does it go? It starts with the presumption just transition has become very prominent. what does it mean, right? What does it mean when we have just transition promoted by ETUC or the IMF or the ETUC? Are they talking about the same things or different things? Because I fully understand that most unions are not just opposed, or not most, I shouldn't say most, just to just transition, they're opposed to transitions for good and bad reasons. I'm not taking a position here. I think sometimes that might be the case. So we have to be aware of the fact that the opposition that often takes place is not to just transition, it might be just to the transition. In fact, they may like the just part. In some other cases, I've been told, oh, just transition, it looks like, we're begging for something. So the point is that there is a substantial part of the union movement that is in favor of a green transition that doesn't like the just transition. So it's complicated, right? Opposed to a green transition, in support of green transition, but not of just transition, in support of both, and maybe there is a fourth category, they just want a just transition. I don't think there's much of that. I think most of the ones that want just transition want a green transition, this also just. So that leaves the question is, what is a just transition? I'm going to give you an answer that you won't like, but that's the best I can do. I find the concept, the idea of essentially contested concepts, which has a history of about 60 years, very, very useful one. What is it? It means that we're talking the same language. You say just transition, you say green transition. I understand you. It's not the same situation where you show up in the Americas and 500 years ago and you say, this is my plot of land, this is my property. And you say, what does that mean? We can't have an essentially contested concept like that. But you can have an essentially contested concept when you're using the same language, but then you disagree. So what do we do? Well, one is to say we need to come up with one definition, one operationalization. That is impossible. We cannot do it with democracy. We cannot do it with parliamentarism. We cannot do it with love. We cannot do it with freedom. So the idea that we're going to come up with one definition of something, and that's our problem, is basically we're setting up for failure. We will not. That's how politics is. So what do we do? Well, the other option is to say everything goes. You can just go out and say, this is my just transition. And the authors I like, one of them is a guy named Connolly, wrote something about sustainable development, is this. It's incumbent upon us to operationalize what we mean by a particular concept, not just define it, to actually indicate how we would measure it, how we would go out to research it, and show that we're going to do that so other people can come along and say, you're saying that this is just transition, but the way you're measuring it, the way you're defining it is just capricious. So that's the approach that I take. And that I think can be applied to resilience because there are different approaches to resilience, adaptation, just transition. I personally, it's my truth, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't want to be caught in a situation where I know I won't be able to persuade you or other people about my concept of just transition. But I also don't think that anything goes. I think it's incumbent upon us to indicate how we're going to operationalize, not just define, operationalize and study particular thing that we're studying so that others can come along and at least understand us or say, well, you're saying this is thing, but then you're measuring it that way. Let's talk about it. I don't know if it's a satisfactory answer, but that's my way of dealing.
Sorry, if I may, it's a satisfactory answer to half of the question. So I understand the way you approach the concepts, essentially contested concepts. I think it sort of resonates with what we call creative ambiguity. Mm-hmm. But again, maybe creative ambiguity is an essentially contested concept. I don't know. But then the question remains whether global labor environmentalism has been able to grab the concept of just transition and made it sufficiently operational so that the idea carried some weight or some impact, or is that not possible to answer that question? Because in the end, I mean, as a research and education institute that wants to support the trade union movement, that's what we also would like to know.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you're absolutely right. My solution or our solution, my collaborators, to say, okay, we look at breadth, depth, agency in addition, say, we can characterize, we can identify particular just transition policies. And we place them within the historical traditional, from sort of neoliberal, managerial, all the way to eco-social. They're trying to synthesize them. I think you can make those kinds of distinctions. I don't think we can agree on one, but at least we are aiming to say, okay, you have a just transition strategy in Colorado. What kind of a just transition strategy is it changing the rules of the game, or is it solving a particular problem? Very narrow. Or you have the European Just Transition Fund. How far does it go? And that's a way to differentiate among specific that's our way of differentiating among specific just transition policies. Because I agree with you, I don't think that even certainly the most ambitious proposals amongst global labor unions have not been able to. I don't think we have a common just transition rationalization in the world of labor.
I think we can give the floor to Mauro.
Mauro?
Mauro, can
Are you
you?
online, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, good. I mean, I'm gonna like switch on the camera. Hopefully that's work. Let me know if you can see. Can you see?
Yes.
Yeah. Apologies for the setting. I didn't know I would appear, but yeah, I'm gonna ask a question. Thank you very much for the presentation. Really interesting. The question I got is about in one of your slides you said global labor environmentalism in 2015, and you mentioned the growing geopolitical competition. I'm not sure if you mentioned that as some sort of background, but one of my concerns, I'm originally from Argentina. I'm speaking I mean, I'm based in the UK, but one of my actually questions is to what extent that geopolitical competition is not just background, but it's actually an element that defines the positions that trade unions might take vis-a-vis green policies and just transition. Just to give you an example, when I think of Argentina, for instance, I can think of two examples that are like just completely the opposite. If you go to the south to Patagonia, the oil sector has been around for more than 100 years. So, for instance, there is a trade union that was called the Oil and Gas Workers Union, and last year changed its name for Oil, Gas, Renewable Energies and Union, like Workers Union, because there is a chance that actually there will be like green hydrogen. Whereas if you go and you mentioned you are working like on lithium, if you go to the north, like the Golden Triangle, like Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, actually the approach is completely different. There has been a lot of violence from the provincial government vis-a-vis indigenous communities, workers, trade unions. So, and the reason I mention this is because, for instance, when I think of Argentina, even there is something called the like commodity consensus. So which means like when you have countries, middle income countries that are heavily like indebted like Argentina, I'm not sure if there is much option for like not exploiting the natural resources that you might have in your country. So in that context, when I think of global labor environmentalism, my question is to what extent there is room for trade unions that might just want to take advantage of those fossil fuels that are there. And the second question, sorry, that was a long one, but the second question, which I'm also interested in, is you mentioned in one of your slides, what kind of organizations, sorry, I'm just checking in my phone, I took photos of the slides. What kind of organizations actually can be part of that? And for instance, I'm thinking again of Argentina, but it could be any Latin American country where you have roughly 50% of the workforce in the informal sector. So to what extent there is room for civil society organizations or like, I mean, in some cases like Argentina or Brazil, they have relatively organized informal workers organizations. To what extent there is room for them to be part of this global movement? And the final question was related to just transition conceptually, but I think you seem to be like very flexible about that based on what you said. Which is absolutely, because I mean, I just want to say to what extent you're not concerned that it's become like a buzzword that is basically used for everything and it has lost massive inverted commas its original meaning. But yeah, anyways, thank you very much.
Sure. Oh, I agree with you about competition, and the interesting thing for me is that if you go to the unions of the industrial world, they use the same kind of narrative. If we don't do it, in the United States, the Chinese will do it, or the Europeans will do it. Some of them now, I don't know, they haven't been paying attention to the Indians, but I think Indians are going to take over the world. So, there's like the rising hegemonic power. So the language of competitiveness, the language of we cannot have, there is no solution, is not limited to the global south. So I think it's incumbent upon us to ask the question of whether, in fact, whether unions in the global south, particularly unions who are rather privileged in the global south, in the energy sector, in the mining sector, when they use that language, are they necessarily reflecting the reality of those countries, or are they promoting a particular reality of those countries? You know that better than I do. My partner works a great deal in Bolivia. We've worked with on different subjects, but it's a little bit more. It is something that's positive. But so I would say certainly when the global north or the industrial world or the rich countries impose a particular mode of production and division of labor, I think we have to take a relational approach because we have to understand the power relations involved. So I absolutely, it's a question for me. I don't have the answer. I have a question, but you'll find the same, in my research in the United States, you find the same thing. Unions are using the same narrative. It's although somewhat modified. With respect to the informal sector, one of the reasons why I am very interested in expanding, but not diluting the concept of just transition, is because a lot of the people who are affected by transitions, including energy transitions, are in the informal sector. And if we don't include them, we're excluding them. So I think it is possible to do that. And I also think that in the project I mentioned earlier about just transition and care, we pay particular attention to the informal and wage sector and ask the question of whether, in fact, we need massive just transitions. You do need a massive transition. If you're going to recognize childcare, you need a massive just transition. So it's the amount of money, or healthcare, and artificial intelligence, or education and the artificial intelligence. So that's a big issue of concern. I don't have the answer, but a big issue of concern. And I think that by not including, by saying that we're going to narrow our definition of just transition and not include all working people, whether they're wage, non-wage, informal or informal, we're creating divisions. I wouldn't blame if people down the road might say, I need to get what I can. I think, well, the third question is, I'm flexible about just transition. I'm not totally flexible. I don't think anything goes. All I'm saying is that I want people to tell me how they operationalize, because that's my way of understanding. Are they talking about just transition as something to solve a very narrow problem? Because after all, von Bismarck started Social Security. That was a just transition, but he did it to keep the Social Democrats at the time from winning the election. So you can have these kinds of quote-unquote just transitions whose goal is to actually co-opt and divide. I want to know that. Tell me what you mean. But that's the best I can do.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's some questions over there. If not, I will just pass the floor to Chen now.
Okay, I have a suggestion maybe and a question. So when you were asking before about the institutions that you want to focus on in the research, and I noticed you had ETUI, and some of its big affiliates, of course, are Industrial, Global, and also Uni Global. Right. So I know they're affiliated, but I wondered if they're worth a separate look, given their significance to those particular industrial sectors. Maybe you're already doing.
Oh, yeah. We will, yes. But we're going to look at the global union federations. We have looked at them already. We know that Industrial has significant, interest in just transition. One of the originators worked for them. Education International has doing some very interesting things, so it's expanding. PSI, BWI, the food, not as much, interestingly enough. And what's surprising to me is Uni doesn't have as much. Unless I'm wrong, we're looking in the wrong place. But Union Network International, somehow they don't really have that much on just transition. And one would think that certainly even with climate and the impacts on climate on work in the service sector, people, who are guards and whatever, I mean, that's a pretty significant issue. But I haven't seen anything. Anybody can, Union Network International, I haven't found anything on them and just transition or environment for that matter. But all the others have something. If I may.
Yeah, sure.
What I have noticed in the project we've done, we didn't interview, we asked questions. We had people from PSI and from Education International in closed webinars talking to us about what they're doing. And one of the things that was interesting is that a number of people, and some of the work is being done, is how do we align climate change and the role of education and healthcare? And I think that's very, very important. But there was less discussion about the possibility that the just transition in healthcare may be due to non-climate reasons like artificial intelligence. So it was kind of a heteronomous approach. And this is one of my concerns, because I think important transitions are coming in education and healthcare, in other kinds of sectors, in addition to climate change. That's my sense. I'm thinking of artificial intelligence as the primary one, but I'm sure other technological innovations, immigration, certainly very.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing was a little while ago, we looked at just transition in the context of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And as you're suggesting with the research foci here, the confederations and the overarching bodies were important, but also at other multiple levels down to the grassroots. And I noticed you mentioned nativism. And of course, in that context, that is extremely important, because some concepts around just transition and relationships with the environment are actually completely overturned when we look at it from that perspective. So is that going to be brought into the ambit of your research framework? Because, I mean, certainly with Māori in that country, where there's an ascendancy, if you like, in their political influence and so forth, this is becoming, it's not just there's a group that we need to touch base with. This is integral to the approaches.
Yeah, I don't know if, we will not go that far, because we're going to be focusing on regional and global union organizations. But you're right, I've done some reading, and you're saying it's kind of reversing, or it's recasting, right?
It's helping to recast what just transition means to some extent. And so, for example, Māori have no concept of ownership of the land. You are stewards. And the land actually is seen as an animate object, if you like. And so it's very interesting.
Very interesting, yes, I agree with you.
Therefore, how do you proceed from that?
Yeah, no, I agree. In one of the webinars we did for our project on land, we talked to particular people from Mapuche activists. It was not exactly the same, but similar. We're still thinking of it, because you're right. You're absolutely right. It's,
you might have reference, potentially. I'll see if I can dig it out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting when you're bringing in new epistemologies, new ways of looking at the world.
Yes, absolutely.
I agree with you.
Okay. Any other questions in the room?
Since I hate long silences, I'll. It was 2 seconds. Terrible. I just had some two, three quick comments, questions, but more clarification. You mentioned that you were going to include social inequalities in your analysis. I was just curious, just roughly speaking, are we then talking about gender equality, just transition, other dimensions, just very quickly on that. Also, you said that there's a desire of union networks to be more like unions. And I found that I would like to use that quote in a future speech, but I don't know what you mean by it. So that would be helpful to understand.
Oh, my quote, but
or the idea. And then also you said at some point that you have a very broad notion of just transition, but that you would actually like to enlarge it further. And then you had a very big smile on your face. And I was just curious why that was the case. Final word, just to by way of anecdote, in my previous job, let's say until 2 years ago, we tried to convince the Belgian Health Insurance Fund, which is called INAMI, so they're the Federal Health Insurance Fund, to start doing research on climate change and healthcare. And we were totally unsuccessful.
Oh, really?
They had no idea why we would want to link climate change to national healthcare policies. Anyway, I hope that you're more successful than I am, or that maybe as a research and education community, we can be successful at some point to convince some national governments to go there, because I agree with you that it's high time.
Yeah, I mean, with respect to social inequality, it's very deeply into our idea of depth. And it was, what do you consider? Do you value social equality? Do you value ecological equality or not? So it's very central. With respect to more like unions, when I was interviewing people about global framework agreements, they told me, a number of them, that they want to just take those global union organizations and give them some different kind of purpose, actually to allow them to negotiate agreements, to not be service organizations, to actually negotiate. So that's what, and so we'd like to be more like unions. So that's what that's come. And so some of them thought of global framework agreements as a way of shifting industrial relations from the national to the global level. There's all variability, but that's what give them a different purpose. And I'm just wondering, we're wondering whether those people who promoted just transition and environmentalism were thinking the same thing, providing some kind of a purpose for the ITUC or the ITF or whatever. So that's something we need to be researching. Now, in terms of the just transition, where I was smiling, people associate just transition, the explicit concept, with the Americans, right? And in fact, for a union that was based in Colorado. So Colorado is the center of the universe, the oil, chemical, and atomic workers union. But those people were democratic socialists, and just transition was part of a democratic socialist program that included gender rights, shorter work day, universal healthcare, you name it. It was not just social democratic, it was more than social democratic, and just transition. And they were calling for a huge trust fund on just transition, for all transitions, to be ready, like you would have it for healthcare, like you have for social security or pensions. So I'm thinking that what they were saying is we need to deal with people and nature, because they were ecologists, social ecologists, when we need to. So I'm thinking to myself, if we go back in time to the 19th century, we have retirement, then we get unemployment, we get healthcare. All those deal with transitions, from employment to being too old, from being healthy to being not healthy, from being somebody who cannot get educated to somebody who can be educated. So for me, the social welfare or the eco-social welfare state is the goal of the just transition. Just transition policies have to be built and enhance the social welfare state, and many of the elements of the social welfare state make just transitions possible. For instance, in the research that we did, we asked people, 100 people around the country in the US, what was their greatest fear from the transition that was affecting them? I'm not going to play tricks with you. I thought they would say, I'm going to lose my job. Are you stupid? I'm going to lose my... I said, no, healthcare. Because in the United States, healthcare is attached to your employer. You lose that, you get sick, that's it. You lose everything. You lose your house, not to mention your life, perhaps. So healthcare. So we would tell them, oh, so you want a universal healthcare? I said, no, we don't want socialism. Well, that's kind of a contradiction, right? Who's going to give it? But the point is that if the United States had a universal healthcare system, they wouldn't have this problem. That's just transition. So I was part of a committee in Colorado to come up with a solution to the healthcare issue. We spent hours, and the best we could come up with is ensuring that people will pay only $1,000 a month for insurance. $1,000 a month, on top of everything else that, various,
Premiums?
The premium was $2,500. We found a way to get $1,500 from some other sources, but still workers got to pay $1,000 out of their pocket. We didn't solve it. The problem was not solved. So that's what I'm saying. That's why I was smiling that, you know, the social world, the social is really the foundation of a just transition. Unemployment benefits, retraining, public education, public health care, housing. If you have those, then you don't need to have ad hoc just transition, in my view. You need to have transitions, but hopefully they will be just. So that doesn't mean, I don't know if that answers, but that's what.
Any other comments, questions? Yes.
I have a question, but I apologize because I missed, I think, the first part of your presentation, and this might not be relevant, but I'm here on behalf of Equinet, the European Network of Equality Bodies. And equality bodies are nationally mandated institutions that should be independent from governments to protect and assist victims of discrimination. And they are being increasingly asked to provide equality assessments of just transition policies. So for example, for the European Social Climate Fund, which I'm not sure is pertinent for your research, but now in June, member states will have to present their social climate plans, which is how they intend to use the fund. And equality bodies were asked to provide, some equality bodies were asked to provide some input in various forms, which so far has not been very meaningful. But I was asking or wondering whether trade unions have also been involved in this, if you foresee collaboration with equality bodies on the review of just transition policies with regards to, for example, of course, labor rights, but also the broader values that we're talking about here that certainly include also equality and non-discrimination.
Yeah, I think others probably are better situated to answer this particular question. I would be lying to you if I knew the details of that.
We have a colleague from FGTB here. Do you have any idea whether trade unions have or FGTB is contributing to this plan, for example, on behalf of the Belgian unions?
I work in the international federation department, not on the European.
Yeah, okay, so
As it seems that this process has been, I mean, the European Union imposed on member states to have a consultative process. And obviously this was done in most cases in a very ad hoc manner. So there is no formal entry point for equality bodies in our case, but I wonder if there was any obligation to invite trade unions also to the table.
if you want on this, we can continue the conversation. So let's say, if you drop me an email on that, it's a question that I would like to, because I'm also interested in the answer, I have to say, to Ludovic Wood, who is the Confederal Secretary at the level of the European Trade Union, at the European Trade Union Confederation, here on the 5th floor, in charge of climate change and all of these topics, and he would definitely know the answer. So I think it's a very relevant.
That's very, yeah.
By the way, more generally, because you've asked us also for suggestions, Jane, you gave one. I think that for suggestions, and I don't know if you know or if you have met Ludovic Wood, but as a Confederal Secretary of the ETUC, is really very much invested in this topic, also making the link with the international organization. So I think there we can very easily put the interface for you to set up an interview. Also within this institute, I think Bella, who I'm sure you know, Bella is also is not here today, but he's working on this topic. So I think that we can usefully set up, but you know. So. But happy to continue that question.
Last question. Yes, Jimenez from the European Green Party. I was very interested by the example you gave on Colorado on the healthcare, because one of the aspects on, well, I also was a bit late, but I saw the last part on the analysis on all the aspects, the breadth and the depth, but also one aspect on increasing, let's say, the strength of green labor, the global labor environmentalists. would be one of the constraints we have is the reluctance of workers and unions more traditional and so on to, well, first of all, exactly job and all what it entails in context of the United States of related to healthcare. But based on your experience in different parts of the world, what would be for you, based on your experience, the main constraints in raising the awareness and it's completely mainstream across workers that let's say ensuring the transition, the globalization, it's something that is not something it's against their job, and also their welfare, but something that it's in the mid and long term is something that it's necessary. And I know in part of my previous job, I was in contact with the case, for instance, Ilva in Taranto, this big steel factory. Of course, that factory provides job to a big amount of the population there, but at the same time, it's creating cancer, it's creating a lot of diseases. So this trade-off, so how can we let's say abandon the agenda to build the alliance that, because it's the, let's say, the right wing has placed like, okay, no, transition is against work and worker. How can we break this false dichotomy and say, no, it's an enabler and something that is needed to secure job and well-being? You could elaborate further on some aspects.
I have ideas. I don't have the answers, but I do have ideas about that. I have a friend. He's been involved with labor and environmentalism since the 70s. He was a union leader in the US. And he said the Achilles heel of labor is environmental change, but the Achilles heel of environmentalism is work, the significance of work. So I think it's very important to understand that, and understand that the overwhelming number of people in the world, 80% in the industrial world, are working people. That is, people who would probably be destitute if they lost their jobs for 2 or 3 months. So we need to understand that, and understand that even people that sometimes considered as middle class, professors, doctors, they are workers. And increasingly in parts of the world, I mean, the union I belong to, we have a climate justice committee. So people are sort of being more proactive. So unions have become more proactive, but it's not an easy process. And it's probably the same thing on the other side. I am also part of a network in Colorado, and we have set up a little committee to bring together unions and environmentalists. How do we work? And one of the things that we learned is that you show up not only when you have something in common, but when they want you to show up. Even if you don't like it, you have to show up. Otherwise, you cannot show up every time that you think there's something in common. Let's collaborate. They have a priority. You're not 100% sure that's your priority, but they say, whether it's unions or environmentalists, that's a priority. I want you to show up. I want you to support me. So that's a way we have been trying to deal with. But I think the starting point is that most of us are working people. And I don't know how to translate that into something, but in the United States, I'm sure in Europe, I know in Greece that's the case. I think labor environmentalists, and the other way, union environmentalists from the other side, they have to fight to change their own organizations. If we don't change our own organizations, I don't think our organizations as well can collaborate. It's a big issue, but I don't think it's just a class issue. I don't think it's a class issue. I think sometimes say it's a middle class version working. I think it's something more, a little bit more nuanced and complicated.
Well, thank you for nicely summarizing that work climate nexus and the big questions around that. I think we're coming to a close now, unfortunately, with time precludes us from carrying on, because I'm sure we could. And thank you very much, Dimitris Stevis. Perhaps we can appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay. And just the question to Maria about a recording possibility.
Yes, it's recorded.
It is not.
It is recorded.
It's already recorded.
Is it going to be made publicly available? Or?
If you agree, yes.
Okay, so that's what we're hoping to do. If anybody doesn't agree, just let us know. And thank you again for your insights and really setting a very high bar.
Thank you so much for allowing me to sort of try out those ideas, because they're not finished. Thanks for your grace. I really appreciate that.
And thank you everybody for coming along, and hopefully we'll see you at the 4th installment of this particular event. Thanks very much.
Maybe just say in 30 seconds, and also the colleague who followed us online was very happy.
Yes.
He wrote an email, but it's now gone, I think, Mauro. So thanks also on his behalf. So yeah, so this was the third ETUI lunchtime session. So I guess it's now official. It's institutionalized. We continue. And in fact, Maria, we had an idea for the next edition somewhere in September, October. Can you say 2 words on that?
Just the title is on future oriented occupations in the EU, so we stay in Europe.
We stay in Europe this time, okay, and it will be an exchange, including with colleagues from DG Employment in the European Commission. They wrote the report, and we'll exchange views on that and compare notes. Maybe just to flag also, when you go outside of this room, there's our little how do you call that? Not bookstall, but the place for. There are some publications here, but also outside the room, there's our quite a few publications, including our recent benchmarking work in Europe. That's our annual flagship publication. There's also the most recent edition of social policy in the EU. There's a lot of interesting stuff also from the education department. National case studies are available on different topics, so feel free if you want to take a copy for whatever you do. It's there for that. And by all means, let's stay in touch and see you next time. Thank you very much.
For those of you who came a little late.